The words came through the phone speaker like a blade I never saw coming. Dad, we need you to understand something. You're holding us back. My daughter Claire said it first, her voice steady and rehearsed, like she'd practiced this conversation in front of a mirror. My son Daniel hummed agreement in the background. That particular sound he makes when he wants to support someone without fully committing his own voice to the cause. I was 51 years old, standing in my kitchen on a Tuesday evening, still wearing my work boots from the construction site I managed, and my own children were telling me I was an obstacle to their happiness. They wanted me to sell the family home, the one I'd spent 23 years paying off, the one where they'd grown up, where their mother had planted roses before the cancer took her. They needed their inheritance early, they explained, to invest in opportunities that couldn't wait. Claire was 32, Daniel 29. Both had good jobs, apartments, lives of their own. But apparently, my continued existence in the home I'd built was now a problem that required solving. I asked them if we could talk about this in person, maybe over dinner that weekend. Claire sighed, that particular exhalation that communicated both impatience and disappointment. We knew you'd make this difficult, she said before ending the call. I sat down at the kitchen table after they hung up, the same table where we'd eaten thousands of meals together, where I'd helped them with homework, where we'd celebrated birthdays and holidays, where their mother and I had shared quiet morning coffees before the world woke up. The silence in the house felt different now, heavier, like it was pressing down on my shoulders with new weight. I thought about my wife, Sarah, and how she would have handled this moment. She always knew what to say to the kids, how to be firm without being harsh, how to guide without controlling. I was the builder, the provider, the one who showed love through actions rather than words. Maybe that was the problem. Maybe I'd been so busy making sure they had everything they needed that I'd forgotten to make sure they understood why those things mattered. Outside, the neighborhood was settling into evening, porch lights flickering on, the sound of a basketball bouncing on pavement somewhere down the street. I'd lived on this street for over 2 decades, watched families come and go, kids grow up and move away, houses change hands. I'd never imagined my own children would see this place as nothing more than locked capital, a financial asset they needed liquidated for their own plans. The next morning, I went to work like always, arriving at the site before most of my crew. I was a construction project manager, overseeing a commercial development that would take another 8 months to complete. The work was honest and demanding, requiring both technical knowledge and people skills, neither of which my children seemed to recognize I possessed. To them, I think I'd always just been dad who works construction, a blue-collar job they'd quietly looked down on even as it paid for their college educations, their cars, their wedding gifts. I walked the perimeter of the site, checking yesterday's progress, making notes for the morning briefing. This was where I felt most competent, most sure of myself. Here, problems had solutions. Measurements were precise. Quality could be verified. If you built something wrong, it showed itself eventually, and you fixed it before anyone got hurt. I wished family relationships worked the same way, with clear blueprints and code requirements, with inspections that caught problems before they became structural failures. My site's supervisor, Marcus, arrived and we reviewed the day's schedule. He'd worked with me for 7 years and could read my moods better than my own kids. "Something on your mind, boss?" he asked. I told him everything was fine, which was the lie men my age tell when everything is very much not fine. That weekend, I drove out to Claire's apartment for the dinner I'd requested, though Daniel had declined to attend, citing work obligations. The place was nice, modern, in one of those new developments with amenities and a concierge desk. She'd done well for herself as a marketing director, just as I'd always hoped she would. We sat across from each other in her dining room, and she laid out her proposal with the efficiency of a business presentation. She and Daniel wanted me to sell the house, move into a smaller apartment or condo, and split the proceeds with them now rather than waiting for the inheritance process after I died. "It's really a win for everyone," she explained, sliding a folder across the table with printouts showing property values, potential returns on investment, retirement community options for me. "You don't need all that space, Dad. You're rattling around in there alone. This way, we all benefit, and you get to see us enjoy the money while you're still alive." Her logic was sound, her presentation polished, her argument rehearsed. What she hadn't accounted for was the fact that the house wasn't just an asset to me. It was the physical manifestation of 30 years of my life, The place where I'd loved my wife, raised my children, built something that was supposed to last. I asked Claire if she remembered the treehouse. She looked confused for a moment, then nodded with a vague smile. Of course, in the backyard. That was nice. Nice. That was the word she chose. I'd spent 6 weekends building that treehouse when she was 9 and Daniel was 6, carefully designing it to be safe and weatherproof, installing proper railings and a roof, even running electricity out there so they could have lights for reading. They'd spent entire summers in that treehouse, hosting friends, creating elaborate imaginary games, sometimes just sitting up there reading or talking. Sarah used to bring them snacks on a tray, passing it up through the access hatch I'd built. The treehouse was still there, weathered now but structurally sound, waiting for grandchildren I'd imagine might use it someday. Do you remember why I built it? I asked. Claire shifted in her seat, uncomfortable with the turn towards sentiment. Because we asked for one? I shook my head. Because your mother was going through her first round of chemo, and you two were scared and sad, and I needed to give you something to look forward to, something that felt normal and fun and safe. I needed you to know that even when things were terrible, I could still build good things for you. Claire's expression softened slightly, but she recovered quickly, returning to her talking points about financial responsibility and practical decisions. I didn't agree to anything that night, and I could see the frustration building in Claire's posture, in the way she organized and reorganized the papers in her folder. Before I left, I asked about Daniel, whether he was really the one driving this idea, or if she was leading the charge. She bristled at the suggestion, insisting they were equal partners in the decision, but I knew my children. Daniel was brilliant with computers, worked in software development, made excellent money, but he'd always been easily influenced, especially by his older sister. If Claire wanted something, she could usually convince Daniel it was his idea too. I drove home that night thinking about Sarah, about the conversations we'd had when she was dying, about the promises I'd made to her. Take care of them, she'd said, gripping my hand with what little strength she had left. But don't let them take you for granted. Teach them what matters. I wasn't sure I'd done a good job with that second part. Maybe I'd been too easy on them, too willing to give them whatever they wanted, too focused on providing material comfort instead of building character. The house was dark when I arrived, and I sat in my truck in the driveway for a long time before going inside, looking at the structure I'd maintained so carefully, wondering if my children even noticed the new roof I'd put on 3 years ago, the updated electrical panel, the foundation work I'd supervised myself. The following week, something unexpected happened at work. The company owner, Gerald Hutchinson, asked to meet with me privately. Jerry was in his 70s, had built the construction business from nothing over 40 years, and was now thinking about succession planning. We met in his office, wood-paneled and filled with photos of completed projects spanning decades. "I'm getting old, Tom," he said, which seemed like an odd opening since I'd never heard him acknowledge his age before. "My kids have no interest in construction. They're in finance, living in New York and San Francisco, doing very well for themselves, I'm told. They want me to sell the company, cash out, retire to Florida, or some such nonsense." He paused, studying me. "But I built this company to build things, not to be liquidated for someone else's portfolio. I've been watching you for a long time, Tom. The way you run sites, the way you treat workers, the way you solve problems. I want to talk to you about a partnership arrangement, potentially buying into the company over time, eventually taking over operations." I sat there, stunned, processing what he was offering. This was a multi-million-dollar operation, with contracts across 3 states, a reputation built over decades. "Why me?" I finally asked. Jerry smiled. "Because you give a damn about the work itself, not just the money it generates. That's rarer than you'd think." I spent the next several days reviewing the documents Jerry's lawyer had prepared, outlining a 5-year pathway to partnership and eventual ownership. The financial structure was generous but demanding, requiring investment on my part, commitment to expanded responsibilities, longer hours, significant risk. At my age, most men were thinking about winding down, not ramping up. But something about the opportunity felt right. Felt like the universe was presenting me with a choice about what the next chapter of my life would look like. I didn't tell Claire or Daniel about any of this. We were barely speaking anyway, communicating only through terse text messages where they continued to push for a decision on the house, and I continued to deflect. I did talk to Marcus about it. and he was enthusiastic, volunteering to take on additional site management responsibilities if I moved into a more executive role. "You've been training me for this for years," he said. "I'm ready if you are." I also consulted with my lawyer, Richard, who'd handled Sarah's estate and helped me navigate the legal complexities of widowhood. He reviewed Jerry's proposal carefully, asked good questions, then looked at me seriously. "This is a major opportunity, Tom. But you need to be clear about what you want the next phase of your life to look like. Are you doing this for yourself or to prove something to your kids?" That question stuck with me. Was I considering this partnership because it genuinely excited me, or because I wanted to show Claire and Daniel that I was more than just an obstacle to their financial planning? I spent a Saturday afternoon going through old photo albums, something I hadn't done in years. There were pictures of Sarah and me when we were young, barely older than Claire was now, smiling in front of our first apartment. Photos of the kids as babies, toddlers, school-aged children, teenagers. Pictures of family vacations, holidays, ordinary moments that had seemed unremarkable at the time, but now glowed with a significance I hadn't fully appreciated when I was living them. There was a photo of Daniel, maybe 7 years old, wearing my hard hat and tool belt, grinning enormously while holding a hammer nearly as big as his arm. I remembered that day. He'd begged to come to a job site with me, and I'd spent the whole afternoon showing him how things were built, how measurements worked, how to read blueprints. He'd been fascinated, asking endless questions, watching everything with intense focus. When had that curiosity died? When had my work become something he looked down on rather than found interesting? Or had I somehow communicated, without meaning to, that I wanted something different for him, something better, something that didn't involve physical labor and weather exposure and the constant risk of injury? Strophe 10. I called Daniel that evening, something I rarely did anymore. He answered with surprise in his voice. "Dad? Everything okay?" We made small talk for a few minutes, awkward and searching, two people who should know each other well, but were somehow strangers. Finally, I asked him directly, "Do you really want me to sell the house? Or is this Claire's idea?" There was a long silence. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter, less certain. "I don't know, Dad. Claire made a lot of good points about investment opportunities and your quality of life. I guess I just went along with it." I pushed gently. "But what do you actually think? If you take Claire's presentation out of the equation, what do you want?" Another silence, longer this time. "I don't want you to be alone in that big house," he finally said. "I don't want you to be lonely. When I think about you there by yourself, rattling around in all those rooms like Claire said, it makes me sad. I feel guilty that we don't visit more, that we're not around. And I guess selling it seemed like a solution to that guilt, a way to not have to think about you being alone." It was the most honest thing either of my children had said to me in years, and it hit me harder than their initial request ever had. They weren't just being greedy or dismissive. They were, in their own misguided way, trying to address a problem they didn't know how to solve. I thought about that conversation for days, turning Daniel's words over in my mind like a stone I was trying to polish into something smooth and comprehensible. They thought I was lonely. Maybe I was, though I'd never quite framed it that way. Alone, yes. The house was quiet, my evenings solitary, my dinners simple and eaten without conversation. But lonely suggested a kind of desperate sadness that I didn't quite feel. I had work, colleagues, neighbors I was friendly with, a routine that felt comfortable and sustainable. What I didn't have was the kind of close family connection that Sarah had maintained so effortlessly, the regular phone calls and visits and shared experiences that make you feel embedded in other people's lives. After she died, I'd retreated into work and routine, and my kids had built their own lives, and somehow years had passed where we drifted into this polite distance. The house had become a symbol of that distance, I realized. To them, it represented my stubborn attachment to the past, my inability to move forward, my role as the unchanging parent while they evolved into adults with their own priorities. To me, it represented stability, continuity, the physical evidence that I'd built something lasting despite life's hardships. Neither perspective was wrong exactly, but we were speaking different languages, valuing different things, unable to bridge the gap between generations and worldviews. I signed the partnership agreement with Jerry in late October, committing to a pathway that would change my professional life fundamentally. The deal required me to invest a substantial portion of my savings and take on significant new responsibilities, But it also came with a corresponding increase in income and, eventually, equity ownership in a thriving company. Jerry wanted to announce it to the broader team at the company's annual meeting in December, making it official and setting expectations for the transition. I still hadn't told Claire or Daniel anything about it, operating in this strange parallel existence where I was making major life decisions without involving the only family I had left. Part of me wanted to keep it secret as some kind of vindication, a reveal that would prove I was more capable and ambitious than they'd assumed. But another part of me, the part that sounded like Sarah's voice in my head, knew that keeping secrets was just another form of distance, another brick in the wall we'd built between us. In early November, I invited both kids to dinner at the house, insisting it was important and non-negotiable. Claire tried to push back, suggesting a restaurant instead, but I held firm. My house, my table, my cooking, I said. Humor your old man. They agreed, reluctantly, and I spent the day before preparing a meal that had been Sarah's specialty, her pot roast with all the traditional sides, the kind of comfort food we'd eaten at every major family gathering when she was alive. They arrived within minutes of each other on a Sunday evening in mid-November, the air cold and smelling of coming winter. I watched them walk up the front path, noting how they moved, how they held themselves. Claire with her purposeful stride and expensive coat, Daniel with his slightly hunched posture and constant phone checking. My children, adults now, successful in their own right, yet somehow still mysterious to me in ways that seemed impossible given I'd known them literally since birth. We sat in the living room first, making awkward conversation, avoiding the elephant we all knew was crowding the space between us. Finally, I brought out the pot roast, and we gathered at the kitchen table, the same table where we'd had thousands of meals, where their mother had presided with warmth and wisdom I'd never quite managed to replicate. I asked you here because I have some things to tell you. I started, serving food onto their plates the way I used to when they were children. And because I have some questions I need honest answers to. Claire's posture stiffened, her executive armor snapping into place. Daniel looked nervous, glancing between his sister and me. First, I continued, I want you to understand that I'm not selling the house. Not now, probably not ever. This house is staying in the family as long as I'm alive to maintain it, and what happens to it after I die will be addressed in my will, according to my wishes. Claire started to interrupt, but I held up my hand, and something in my expression must have conveyed that I was done being talked over, because she stopped. Second, I need you both to understand something about inheritance and family and what you're actually asking for. When you ask me to liquidate my home and give you money now instead of later, you're not just making a financial request. You're telling me that your immediate wants are more important than my lifetime of work, my memories of your mother, my right to live in the home I built and paid for. You're telling me I'm in your way, that my continued existence in this space is an inconvenience you'd like to solve with early access to money I haven't even died yet to leave you. My voice was steady, not angry, just clear and direct in a way I'd never quite managed with them before. Daniel had gone pale, staring at his plate. Claire's jaw was tight, but I saw something flickering in her eyes that might have been shame. Third, I continued, I'm not just your aging father who works construction and lives alone and needs to be managed like a problem requiring a solution. I'm a professional with skills and experience and value in my field. Next month, I'm becoming a partner in Hutchinson Construction with a pathway to eventual ownership. Over the next 5 years, I'll be building something significant, not winding down into retirement like you seem to think I should be. The silence that followed was profound. Claire recovered first, her mind clearly racing through the implications. You're becoming a partner? In Jerry's company? Dad, that's... I had no idea you were even being considered for something like that. Daniel looked up, confusion and something else, maybe pride, mixing in his expression. That's a huge deal, Dad. Hutchinson Construction does massive projects. You'd be running the whole operation eventually? I nodded, watching them process this information, watching their mental image of me shift and recalibrate. I've been working toward this for years without fully realizing it, I explained. Jerry values the same things I do: quality work, ethical practices, building things that last. His own kids want him to sell out and retire, but he wants the company to continue with someone who cares about the work itself, not just the profits. I paused, letting that parallel sink in. So while you've been thinking of me as an obstacle holding you back, I've been building a future that has nothing to do with whether or not I'm convenient for your investment plans. Claire looked stricken, genuinely upset in a way I hadn't seen since she was a child. Dad, I never thought. We didn't mean it like you're making it sound. But Daniel spoke up quietly. We kind of did though, didn't we? We made it all about us, about what we wanted, without ever asking what you wanted or what you were working. The conversation that followed was difficult but necessary, the kind of clearing the air discussion that families avoid until crisis forces honesty. I told them about the loneliness Daniel had mentioned, acknowledging it was real even if I'd been managing it. They told me about their guilt, their feeling that they'd somehow failed Sarah by not maintaining the close family bond she'd created. Claire admitted that her proposal about the house had been partly motivated by her own recent divorce, her need for financial security after splitting assets with her ex-husband, though she'd been too proud to frame it that way. Daniel confessed that he'd been afraid to visit the house because it reminded him too much of their mother, that every room held memories that hurt to confront. We talked about grief, about how we'd all handled Sarah's death differently and separately, never really coming together to share the burden of loss. I'd retreated into work and solitude. Claire had thrown herself into her career with almost manic intensity. Daniel had moved away, geographically and emotionally, creating distance as a coping mechanism. None of us had acknowledged that we were all struggling, all trying to fill the vacuum Sarah had left, all failing in different ways to be the family she would have wanted us to be. Your mother made it look easy, I said at one point, keeping us all connected, making sure we talked and spent time together, remembering what mattered. I never realized how much work she was doing behind the scenes until I had to try to do it myself. As the evening wore on, something shifted in the atmosphere, a softening of the defensive positions we'd all been holding. Claire asked about the partnership deal, genuine curiosity replacing her earlier shock. I walked her through the structure, the timeline, the challenges ahead. She had good questions, her business acumen showing through, and I found myself appreciating her analytical mind instead of resenting it. Daniel wanted to know about the projects I'd be overseeing, and I pulled up plans on my laptop, showing him the scope and complexity of the work. His eyes lit up when I explained the technology integration, the software systems we used for project management, the intersection between his world and mine that neither of us had noticed before. We cleared the dishes together, moving around the kitchen in a rhythm that felt familiar despite the years of distance. I want to propose something, I said as we finished cleaning up. Instead of you two inheriting this house someday and selling it immediately, what if we started thinking about it differently? What if this becomes the family gathering place, the home base where future generations can connect? I'm not going to live forever, but while I'm here, I can maintain it. And when I'm gone, maybe one of you, or eventually your children, might want to keep it in the family. I paused, looking at both of them. But that only works if we actually act like a family. If we visit and spend time together and build new memories instead of just preserving old ones. Claire wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, a gesture that reminded me painfully of Sarah. I'd like that, Dad. I really would. I'm sorry for how we approached this whole thing. I was so focused on my own financial stress that I turned you into a problem to solve instead of a person to consider. Daniel nodded in agreement. We messed up. We treated you like you were just this static thing in our lives, like you weren't still growing and changing and building things. That partnership, Dad, that's incredible. You should have told us you were even being considered for something like that. I shrugged. You never asked what was happening in my life. And I didn't volunteer information because I felt like you'd already decided who I was and what I was capable of. We all made assumptions instead of communicating. We sat back down at the table, coffee now instead of dinner, and started making plans. Real plans, not vague promises. Weekly phone calls, alternating who initiates. Monthly dinners, rotating locations. Holidays at the house, establishing new traditions while honoring old ones. Claire volunteered to help me set up some technology to make the house feel less empty. A better sound system, streaming services, video calling equipment, so we could check in face-to-face. Daniel offered to visit one weekend a month to help with maintenance projects, acknowledging that he'd like to relearn some of the skills I tried to teach him as a kid. 3 months later, I stood in front of the assembled staff at Hutchinson Construction's annual meeting, being formally introduced as the new partner and future owner. Jerry made a speech about legacy and values and finding someone who understood that construction was about building communities, not just structures. The applause was genuine, my colleagues clearly supportive of the decision. In the back of the room, I saw Claire and Daniel, who'd asked to attend, who wanted to see this moment that marked a significant transition in my life. After the ceremony, we went to lunch, the three of us, and talked about the projects I'd be leading, the challenges ahead, the excitement and terror of taking on this much responsibility at 51 years old. Mom would be so proud of you, Claire said at one point, and I felt the truth of it resonate through my chest. Sarah would be proud, not just of the professional accomplishment, but of the fact that we were sitting together, talking honestly, rebuilding what had been broken. That night, alone in the house that was no longer a point of contention but a foundation for future connection, I sat in my workshop and pulled out the old plans I'd drawn years ago for a second treehouse, bigger and more elaborate than the first. Someday there might be grandchildren who needed a place to feel safe and have adventures. And when that time came, I'd be ready to build it, just like I'd built everything else worth having in my life, with patience, care, and a commitment to making things that last.